How's it going, everybody? I'm Ryan. He's Abby. We're the Expansion Bros, and the Buffalo Sabres have officially announced the next head coach. It is the return of Lindy Ruff behind the bench here in Buffalo. And, you know, I know we talked about these coaches, you know, what was that, just a few days ago, and then Kevin Adams drops this on us, and we're scrambling to find a time to coordinate and start talking about it. But when we first recorded that, I think I said I was at a 5. I don't remember what you said you were at. Do you recall?
I was pretty high on Lindy. I want to say I gave him an 8.5 or something like that.
Okay, yeah. I think part of it for me is if I decouple the name from the coaching body and what he's done and his accomplishments, I think I probably would have had a higher score. I think Lindy probably, if it wasn't for him having previously coached the Buffalo Sabres, I probably would have been a lot higher on a guy like Lindy Ruff. Because, you know, I did all this research after he got announced as the head coach. And, you know, we're getting my notes ready for the podcast, and I'm looking at all this stuff. I'm like, this is the guy I want. And, you know, Lindy Ruff, like, just because he former coach, has coached us before, you know, long time guy. I mean, I guess I just kind of just brushed it off because of nostalgia. But looking at his time since Buffalo, he's actually done really, really well with what he's had.
No, I totally agree. And I think the one thing I look back to is his good season with New Jersey more than anything. Because, again, that's a team that had a ton of talent. And, again, I'll say it, like, again, Buffalo reminds me a lot of Vancouver last year, where they do have a ton of talent. You know, there's a lot of players here. There's even some depth, and they just can't seem to be able to put it in kind of the right way about it. So I think a coach like Lindy Ruff, who's kind of has a better way of thinking about it, and while he may be a little bit older coach, he has a modern way of thinking as well. I think he can really harness the most out of this team, and he's always been good at working with young stars like Jack Hughes, so he can make sure Tage Thompson gets back on track and the young defensemen get back on track this year. So I'm excited to see what he can do.
I think that's a great point too. I do see a lot of similarities between us and New Jersey too. Maybe we're rounding into that last season's New Jersey, right? But these past 2 seasons looked a lot like his first 2 seasons in New Jersey, and maybe it's time for year 3. But you know, you mentioned that, you know, he's a bit older. He is, I think, 64 years old, right? So I don't know how many years he's going to be behind the bench. I know he's got a 2-year contract, so that's something we should all keep in mind, right? How long is Lindy going to be the guy, right? I mean, if we have tremendous success, is he just going to stay back there? Or, you know, if we have good success, make a couple runs, is he going to extend? I don't know. It's really exciting to think about all the positives that can go with it. The negatives, obviously, I don't know if there's any way further down than where we're at. The only thing I would think about is, you know, Lindy Ruff's legacy, right? You know, if we end up bottoming out again and we finish with, you know, 79 points next year, right, with Lindy's first year, that's not a great look. And, you know, it might undo. I don't think it ever will fully undo, but it's always going to be like, he was great, but then when he came back, ouch, right? So I don't think that's going to happen, just based on what I know about Lindy Ruff, what I've seen about Lindy Ruff, and the new Lindy Ruff. And that's one of the things that a lot of people on Twitter and social media and just in conversations asking about, you know, give us Lindy Ruff back. We need somebody who's going to, like, just scream and yell and tear the bench off in front of these players and whatnot. And it just doesn't seem to be Lindy Ruff's style anymore. He you know, I watched his whole introductory press conference yesterday. I thought it was really, really encouraging. It felt good. Lindy's back. I mean, the press conferences have a little bit of energy, but I think he's evolved, to your point, you know, an older coach who's got newer styles.
The old dog can learn new tricks, if you will. He, as you said, he's learned to be a little less rough.
Oh my God, that's so bad.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you guys sit in that one for a couple seconds.
Let's just move on.
No, have a drink of your tea. Let's let everyone just sit there and think about Lindy being a little less rough. Yep. Anyways, no, I think it'll be curious to see how they do next year and what adjustments they make, right? Like, they may not make too many adjustments at all, right? Because, again, a lot of the good players are playing where they're supposed to, but obviously you also have a lot of young talent still kind of coming into their own. Benson, Savoy, etc. And you still have talented young players. Like I'd still call Tage Thompson pretty young. JJ Paterka, Dylan Cousins. These guys are still pretty young. Um, so I'll be curious to see exactly what he does, right? Because I know we kind of used to have that kind of balance on a line where it was like two young guys and an old guy, kind of on like each line. So I'd be curious to see how he deploys everyone as well. Will he continue to keep them together? Will people like younger players see a higher place in the lineup? Will he have like sticking to the lines and then making small adjustments? Those are all things I'd be curious to see, and I'm sure training camp will probably have the biggest factor on that because that'll be his first time to really get a view of all these people beyond just the videotape of this season.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a fun point. I mean, we're going to dive into the analytics, of course, because it's me. But
Hmm.
you mentioned deployment and how he's going to roll these guys out. I believe there was a Twitter account. I think it's a private Twitter account, but like Kevin, if you're a Buffalo Sabres fan, his name is Kevin. He's got a great Twitter account. He's a great follow. So
Shout out, Kevin.
check him out. Yeah. But he posted a chart of 5-on-5 deployments, right?
Hmm.
And what players got what ice time, and were they matchup specific or the offensive zone, defensive zone, right? And you can see in New Jersey this year under Lindy Ruff, it was a diagonal line, right? So certain players got defensive, certain players got offensive, right? Offensive and plus matchups and whatnot. So it was very calculated. With Buffalo,
Hmm.
it was just kind of this straight line across, almost like Don Granato was like, "It's your turn. Go second line. I don't care like that it's a minute and a half left and we need a goal. Like third line, you're up." Right? It kind of just feels
Hmm.
like Granato was just kind of maybe worrying about deployments later, but ultimately it was one of those things that I started to have a gripe with towards the end of the season. And to see that Lindy Ruff, had that calculated deployment, is really, really nice to see. So I think it's just, those are the nuances of coaching that I think, a lot of us with our blue lights in the stands don't really think about, but that's
Hmm.
just so, it's so important to the flow of a game, getting the right matchups, the right lines out there, the right guys in the right situation at the right time. That's a huge thing that a coach can affect on game day, right? Because we talk about all these systems and preparation, and you can't really say, okay, guys, we're going to completely change our system here in the second period. It doesn't really work like that. I know you can see teams go into a shell, but still, what coaches really can do is maybe make a couple line changes in the game. But ultimately, like
Hmm.
when guys go out on the ice, that's what the coach controls. I mean, most directly on game day.
Yeah, absolutely. As well as kind of their preparedness level, right? Um, Again, that also falls in the assistant coaches, right, and the video coaches to make sure they see the right clips, they know the right matchups, they know the tendencies of the players. Again, it also depends on who you're talking about, right? If you're Tage Thompson, right, you're probably a little more concerned about yourself than you are the opponent, right? You're the unicorn. You want to be able to go do the damage, right? Maybe you look at a defensive pairing you can exploit or something like that, but you're more concerned about your own game. Whereas, if you're Rasmus Dahlin and you're trying to shut down the opponent's top line, then maybe there needs to be more video work and all that as well. Um, yeah.
And I think the whole coaching staff getting on the same page was essentially another speaking point of Lindy Ruff's. I doubt you got a chance to catch the press conference with how busy you've been, and with the
Mhm.
playoffs going on, you're probably not worried about the Sabres coaching press conference. But but he mentioned about getting the whole coaching staff on the same page and everybody agrees to the way we play. This is how we play. And you
Mhm.
can basically say these are the non-negotiables. This is what we have to do if we're going to play this way. We all agree that we want to play this
Yeah.
way. And that's that thing. It's that
Yeah.
structure. And I think Lindy Ruff mentioned accountability, right? Because there was a lot of quotes in exit interviews and the locker clean out interviews, was a lot of quotes about accountability. And of course, Lindy was asked about it plenty of times in the press conference. And, he was just talking about, the players have to hold them accountable. And he was talking about his biggest tool being ice time. He can give a player who's playing well more ice time, and somebody who's not doing what they should less ice time. And it's kind of nice to see that. I mean, Granato dabbled with
Mhm.
that a bit, but I think that's the kind of accountability that today's NHL players need. They don't need the chewing out on the bench in their face, because
Mhm.
that's going to be on social media within
Yeah.
seconds. And it's not
100%.
good. And, speaking of social media, Lindy Ruff was even like, yeah, I've tried to call players, and something I had to learn that, you know, a lot of times this user doesn't have a voicemail set up. So he's like, I'll just text people now, and I'm more than willing to have players text me. He's like, that's how they communicate, and it's good. So really, it just, I think the adaptation of Lindy Ruff, I think he just wants to be a really good coach. Whatever it takes. He's going to connect to these guys. He's going to do whatever it takes. He doesn't have, this is how I've always done it. This is like how the game should be played. But, you know, he's going to figure it out and develop a system. And I mean, man, he's coached through so many different eras. We talk about the Sabres from the late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s, early 2010s. And then you get into the 2000 teens with his time with Dallas. The scoring was way down, yet he still led an offensive team there in Dallas. And then now you come to the modern era with New Jersey, and man, they are a fast team. They play fast, and it's the modern style. And I'm so excited to see what he can do with this team, because it feels like we have a coach that's going to really implement a structure, and you can look at the TV and say, that is Sabres hockey, right? You know what a Sabres game looks like, because the Sabres have a distinctive style. And I think that's something that's been missing since he's left.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I want to go back to what you said on kind of being on the same page with the assistant coaches, and not to shoehorn in the Canucks again. That's exactly what we did this year. Is we brought in Gonchar and Foote, who directly worked with our defensemen, and Gonchar with our Russians as well. And they were able to really work with Tocchet and, again, get that mentality of, you know, for the defenseman, making sure you're in the right position, making the right breakout passes, right, neutralizing the other team's transition game, the same way that the Tocchet was preaching back checking to the forwards. And again, that's why you saw Vancouver become a much better defensive unit over the year, was because there was unity between the coach, the assistant coaches, and then just the myriad of other personnel the Canucks have. They are just spoiled in that front, where they have the Sedins, they have Chris Hagen, they have all these players that are willing to give back and to the team, just because, again, like, for whatever reason, they seem to like us. So with the Sedins, I guess they were here their entire career, and Chris Higgins for the bulk of his career. I think he's moving now, I saw online, to social media, but he was there as like helping with player development, and a ton of other alumni there on the ice in each practice, helping reinforce what Tocchet's saying, but then providing a little bit of spice from their own career, right? So the Sedins would work on the power play, and they used to have a deadly power play where they'd cycle it around for minutes on end. So kind of bringing their own expertise, but then going back to that central vision, like you said. When a team has a vision in what they need to go for, like you said, developing an identity for Sabres hockey, that's when they can really succeed, because then you start when you have a system, you can figure out which players fit in that system and then build around that system, rather than trying to throw players together who have different strengths and weaknesses and to fit different systems differently, where you kind of end up with mixed results, like I think we've seen over the last few years with the Sabres.
You know, it's funny that you're talking about this way, because I mean, it sounds like you were at the press conference with Lindy Ruff, because he echoed a lot of what you said there, you know, and talking about former players, right? He said he got a text from Thomas Vanek, Ryan Miller, and Jason Pominville, basically saying, you are the guy that can take them to the next level. Like, congratulations. So that's really encouraging to hear that those guys are still, you know, they care about Lindy and they care about the Sabres. You know, obviously still informed with that, but I think getting guys in the right positions is huge, right? But I think Lindy's going to bring back sort of what we did last season, not this season that just happened, but the previous season, where we were a lot more entertaining and a lot more offensive, and we came within 1 point of making the playoffs, right? And I think that's where we fit best. I think that's where the roster is constructed to do. So it makes me wonder why this season we went away from it so much, but this season's over. We'll continue to talk about Lindy, and speaking about his offensive game, I had to get to it at some point. I wanted to dive into the numbers, and this is really what encouraged me. So those of you that are still skeptical about Lindy and think this could be just the nostalgia hire, I implore you to listen to this section like very, very keenly, because this is what swayed me from about a 50-50, like on the fence, to a 7-8, maybe even higher. I'm trying to pump the brakes. I'm not quite ready to get fully hurt again. So talk to me in October, and I might be at a 12 out of 10. But for now, we're sitting at a 7 or an 8. But these numbers are great. So we'll go through his 2 coaching stints since he left Buffalo, right? The era way back when he coached Buffalo, those of us that have watched the Sabres and all us Sabres fans, like, we understand what he did with the team in the 05-06 run, 06-07, the teams before that, the teams after that. They were all super fun to watch. But let's, not maybe pay attention more to what he did after, right? Because he's grown quite a bit. He mentioned that, when he got fired, he thought he was not a good coach or not a good enough coach. He's like, I had to get better, which is why he took the assistant job in New York, because he just wanted to keep improving and keep coaching. But now looking at his time with Dallas. So he spent 4 full seasons in Dallas. In year 1, they did make the playoffs as the second wild card. In year 2, they had 92 points, but missed by 7 points, which is just crazy that the second wild card had 99. And then in his 3rd season, they won the Central and were first in the West. They did end up losing in the second round of the playoffs, but still, fantastic regular season. And then in the 4th season, they only accumulated 79 points. So that was kind of the flame out period. But taking a look at some of the advanced metrics for his team, as far as expected goals in Dallas, they expected goals for, they finished 6th, 2nd, 1st, and 8th in expected goals per 60 minutes at 5-on-5.
8th is that flame out year, yeah?
Yep, yeah, that's the last year. So these are in order. That's pretty good.
So. That's very consistent.
Yeah, right. And then speaking of consistent, we'll take a look at the expected goals against in Dallas. 23rd, 23rd, 24th, and 27th. So clearly defense was not his strong suit, and I don't think it got better in Dallas. Again, he never finished outside of the top 15 teams, top half of the league at this point, except for that last year in total expected goals percentage, right? That's the percentage of goals for and goals against. But he was at like 50.5, 52.5, 52.3, and 49. Those are all very, very good. All of those numbers, by the way, are better than anything the Sabres have posted under Don Granato or since Lindy Ruff has left. So like 49.1 would be good for the Sabres standards right now. But you can see that offensive-minded team in a low-scoring era and just really, really good offensive numbers that mean you are generating more chances than your opponent, and they are generally out-chancing most of the league when it comes to expected goals for. The power play doesn't sing as good of the special teams doesn't sing as good of a story, and I know that's kind of a point of contention this year with Sabres fans because our power play was mediocre, and even an average power play might have gotten us across the line, but 23rd on the power play, 12th, 4th, and 20th. And then it was
very inconsistent.
Yeah, I mean, power plays are one of those things that kind of come and go based on the talent. I mean, I feel like there's really only one team that I can think, well, maybe 2, but Edmonton and Tampa seem to be the only 2 teams that have year over year consistently good power plays. But even then, they've had like the same 5 on the unit for the last like 3-4 years. So that's about the point of consistency there. Penalty kill, also not great, was 21st, 19th, 10th, and 30th. 30th being the worst that year. He's never had good goaltending, by the way, outside of Ryan Miller. We'll talk about that when we get to New Jersey for sure. But again, you can't just say, he hasn't had good goaltending, because at some point, as the coach, you got to have a little responsibility to maybe not leave your goaltender out to dry or hope that he helps you out so much. But, I mean, those numbers are encouraging then in Dallas, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that Dallas time, and then we're going to move here into the New Jersey era, which is, I think, the most applicable to what we're going to see in 2024, 2025 with the Sabres.
Yeah, I'm sure. Speaking of his goals, I don't remember off the top of my head who his goals, but probably would have been like Antti Niemi, Kari Lehtinen. Yep. Okay goalies, not particularly awful, but not exactly, a high-end starter caliber. So I'm with you. I agree. And listening to that special teams, that the good thing about that is if your coach is a good head coach, you can find good assistant coaches to handle those, right? Like, again, as far as defensemen go, again, not to shoehorn me in again, but as far as the Canucks go, right? Like, Adam Foote just handles the defense, and Taka just trusts him to do that, right? The Sedins run the power play. If Ruff can just do his thing as a coach and motivate the players and hold them accountable, then and can get good line matchups and all that during like 5-on-5, then you can figure out the rest after that, right? Because the majority of the game is played 5-on-5. Yes, special teams is important. Of course, it's important. But you can always figure that out, make the right hires. Once you have the base, you have to have a base you're building off of first, right? You have to have players who feel like they're being held accountable, who feel like they're they're on their game, right? Because if they're on their game, then they're going to be more productive on the power play. If they feel defensively strong, they'll be more likely to have that structure on the PK, and then you can kind of figure things out after. But as much as it is a little concerning to hear that kind of yo-yoing on the power play and penalty kill, that's still something that doesn't discourage me from the Lindy hire at all. I think that's something you just work around.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I don't know that team well enough. I don't remember the Dallas Stars of
absolutely.
the 15-16 run, that well. I'm not that kind of sports encyclopedia. So it could have been a personnel thing. Somebody could have missed games. I did do more research into the personnel here in New Jersey with his next stint coming a few years later. He did go to the Olympics in Russia, and he said he focused, he wanted to build a defensive style with, I believe he coached Canada, or was a coach on the Canada coaching staff. But he mentioned defense was something that he knew he needed to get better at, and in the modern game, how does he do it? And I think you can see that kind of trend here in New Jersey. Now, Lindy Ruff is never going to be a defensive coach. He may be old, but he is not a defensive coach. He always wants to score goals and put on a show. So we're going to reset the stage here for New Jersey. 2020, 2021. This was the COVID season where all the divisions were realigned. We had the Canadian division. We had the East, right? We had all that weirdness going on. PK Subban was still on the Devils at this time. It was Jack Hughes' second season, right? You got to bring yourself back to that New Jersey Devils team. It was young. It was potential, but it was not that great. They were the second youngest team in the NHL at that point. Hello, Buffalo. We are there now. But in this season, they didn't do well. They had I want to say 46 points in 56 games or whatever it is. This below 500. But their team ranked 14th in expected goals for, 21st in expected goals against, and 19th in expected goals percentage. So pretty middling. 28th power play, 31st penalty kill.
Oh boy.
Special teams really hurt him that year. Again, the COVID, the bubble, the taxi squad. It's so weird. Such a weird era.
Taxi squad. Oh my God. I forgot about that.
Right? I was doing research and I looked on Wikipedia about the season. I wanted to confirm it was the season after we all started getting vaccinated. And it was taxi squad on the Wikipedia article. I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad we don't have to think about that or deal with any of that stuff anymore. But then the next full season, they finished with 63 points in 2021, 2022. But their underlying metrics weren't as bad as the season before. They were 12th in expected goals for, moved up a little bit, and 18th in expected goals against, moved up there as well. 15th in the league in expected goals percentage. So they were slightly top half, just kind of unlucky with results, I would say. Process didn't get the results, but it was still a good process. Their special teams, 28th on the power play, so still not good there, but 14th on the penalty kill. So decent improvement. So you can see the runway was starting to be laid, and I believe that's when the Devils finished on that hot streak. After the trade deadline, I believe the Devils were really good, starting to click, and everyone was like, okay, maybe the Devils will be something. And then in 22-23, which is the season before this last one, they finished second in the Metro, third overall in the East. They had over 110 points, and they won a series against the New York Rangers in 7. So that team absolutely took that next step and went to the next level. Expected goals for, ranked 4th. Expected goals against, ranked 9th. Expected goals percentage were second only to the Carolina Hurricanes with Rod the Bod Brind'Amour.
Wow.
So you can see his teams have always kind of leaned offensively. Defensively, if they figure it out, right, they're dominant. 13th on the power play, 4th on the penalty kill. So you can see some of that defensive work that he did maybe over in Sochi is paying off.
Mm-hmm. No, certainly. It's nice to see that bounce back and that kind of steady progression where, your offense is still like the leading factor, but you see everything improve basically every year. You got the power play top half, a good penalty kill, great defensively, and then that's the fourth rank offense. That's all spectacular, right? It's just that's kind of what you would hope you can do with the Sabres, right? And I think that's why he has the 2-year contract is just in case it takes a year to get everything together. Because he isn't getting games this year, right? And obviously there's going to be change in personnel and all that as well, maybe to a lesser extent, because it feels like a lot of the players are kind of set in, but for whatever changes to personnel there are, he can kind of get settled with those, um, and kind of have that progression where you see like, okay, we were at X amount this year. How much have we improved under Lindy? And then it's a little easier to give him that leeway perhaps for a second year if you see that true improvement in at least a couple categories.
Yeah, and I think he got a raw deal. I've said this multiple times, but I think this season when he got fired, I don't know. I don't think it was earned. I don't think it was deserved. I think what he did,
I agree.
You mentioned that progression with a young team to all of a sudden being second in the Metro. This season, they were on 64 points after his 61 games, and they decided to fire him. They were 8 points back with 2 games in hand in the wild card race, and they were 7 points back with 1 game in hand in the division race. During his 61 games, I was able to filter down the numbers to only get Lindy's time this past season with the Devils. They ranked 2nd in expected goals for, 17th in expected goals against, and 6th overall in expected goals percentage.
Whoa.
The team was still playing good hockey, but we'll talk about the injuries and the goaltending. I think that's I think it's a failure on the GM rather than a failure on Lindy's coaching, right? These numbers lead me to believe that New Jersey was still playing well. They just didn't get the results. 14th on the power play, 17th on the penalty kill, so nothing really to point to there. What I will point to are the goaltending. We all know New Jersey had a terrible goaltending time until they acquired Jake Allen way too late to save Lindy Ruff's job. Their goalies saved 0 goals above average, meaning they were league average if they just per shot. However, they saved 17.6 fewer than expected.
Ooh.
So they were not doing any favors, right? Like, we're talking about average. It means the Devils were giving up low danger chances that the goalies were letting in, right? They were allowing a average amount of shots, and the goalies were allowing an average amount of goals against, but they weren't particularly good shots. It's just horrible goaltending numbers. And again, like I said, you can't excuse every season that Lindy's had bad defense on just blame it on the goalie.
Bad goalie, yeah.
But still, this goaltending situation in New Jersey was downright terrible. Not to mention, they let a couple guys walk in free agency, brought in a couple young guys in Luke Hughes and Simon Nemec to replace them, and those guys had a little bit of a learning curve. They weren't going to hit the ground running like a Damon Severson, who's in his mid to late 20s, is going to do, right?
Yeah.
The injuries, I think, I think people forget about that. They point to the goaltending issues, and they don't really look at the injuries. I sorted by ice time this season, by average ice time in the games they played. Number 2 was Dougie Hamilton. He missed 41 of Lindy's 61 games. 67% for your number 1 defenseman in Dougie Hamilton. Jack Hughes,
top 2 defenseman as well.
Yeah, Jack Hughes, 3rd in average time on ice, missed 16 of the 61, which is 25%.
Yeah.
Simon Nemec, who I just mentioned, the young kid, looked pretty good in New Jersey. 5th highest average ice time on the team, by the way. Missed 21 games of Lindy's tenure, 34%. And then 6th, Nico Hischier, missed 11, which is 18%. You're talking like if the Sabres didn't have Dahlin for 2/3 of the season, if we missed Tage Thompson for a quarter of the season, if we missed Owen Power for 1/3 of the season, and then we missed Dylan Cousins for another 20%. How good do you think our results would be? We'd be way under 500. But somehow Lindy was able to get this team to a top 10 ranking in expected goals percentage and above 500 and in the hunt with 20 games to go. I mean, to pick up 7 points in 20 games, it's a lot, but it wasn't horrible.
Well, I think the other thing to point out is that you said they were second in expected goals for, yes?
Yeah, exactly.
That's even more impressive considering the caliber of talent that was out. Dougie Hamilton's a very strong defenseman offensively. Obviously, Jack Hughes goes without saying. People pay to watch him play. Kind of backfired at the end of the year there, but he's a strong offensive player. Nico Hischier, another, again, top 6 forward. Like, these are good players. Nemec, again, as a young defenseman, they tend to contribute offensively. The players he's losing are strong offensive personnel, and he's still getting strong offensive results with a hamstrung unit. It speaks for itself. I totally agree. I don't think he should have been fired either.
I think Lindy's a good coach. I think he can absolutely still coach, and I kind of wanted to bump up, these numbers against what the Sabres have been doing. Right, the Sabres, they haven't been good analytically, and I think analytics is another point that I was excited to hear his answer on. We'll touch on that in in a little bit here, but the Sabres play better when they play an offensive style, and that's what Lindy obviously does. I mean, he's never had a season where his team is ranked in the bottom half of the league in expected goals for. It's always been the top half of the league. The Sabres last season, the season where we missed by 1 point and it was fire wagon hockey and everything was happening. We were a really good offensive team. We were only ranked 14th in expected goals for. So we weren't a top 10 analytics unit at generating chances, but our shooting was so good that it made up for it, right? I think we had like a top 5 in actual goals scored per game, but we were only 14th in expected goals for. So, I mean, 14th is literally the worst season that Lindy Ruff has ever had a team rank in expected goals. That was his first season in New Jersey in that COVID season. Other than that, 12th is his next worst, and the rest of his 6-7 seasons have been in the top 10, right?
Yeah.
So we want to talk about, the Sabres were really good offensively last year, but Lindy's teams were better. So, I mean, that team that missed in 21-22 had a better expected goals ranking than the Sabres team. Oh, by the way, we ranked 27th in expected goals against last year in Don Granato's best season as a coach. So, you look at Lindy's worst seasons here, his 14th and 21st is still better than Don Granato's, what he did with the Sabres last year in his best season. So it leads me to believe that I really think the coaching difference is going to be huge. I think it's going to be really, really, really exciting to see if he can get this team to play like that. I think the talent's there. If the shooting talent regresses back up to the mean, because I think like Dylan Cousins was below, he'll go back up, everybody will start to go back, maybe Peterka comes down, but right, we level out and the team just generates better chances. Oh man, I gotta stop myself from getting too excited right now. I'm getting kind of like antsy in my chair, just getting excited about it. But it's a match made in heaven, and I go back to thinking about all this from the lens of I was at a 5 out of 10 in the search process, right? I obviously didn't do this much of a deep dive into every candidate. I just put a bullet point or two in my notes. But after doing the research, I think Kevin Adams got it right. Name aside, history aside, this is the right coach for the Buffalo Sabres right now.
Totally agree. I agree. It's I don't want to jump on the train yet, but it's certainly sounding like an exciting time to be a Sabres fan, just because now, again, there was always that worry, right? You guys were going to hang on to Granato for like you mentioned, part of next year, gets fired midseason. You don't even know who's available to replace him. It just sounded like it was going to be a mess. So knowing who your coach is going to be and having that certainty and having it being someone who is a certified veteran, who knows what they're doing and has a track record of analytical success, that's all just great. Great signs for the future and a reason to have hope, and eventually a reason to be ready to be hurt again.
Yeah, right. I feel like I keep jumping between an 8 and a 12 like every hour, when I think about it. I'm trying to keep myself in check. But yeah, I mean, analytically, his teams do well. And, analytically, Granato's didn't. And we've seen Granato with a quote about analytics, right? He was asked about it and how how you balance the eye test versus the analytics. Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you analytics tell the whole story and that's all you need to focus on, right? That's not ever how I want to pitch it. And those of you that are listening and you think I'm that way, I'm sorry if I come across that way, but I try not to say analytics are the end all be all, but they're a tool. They're a great resource for us to use. And Don Granato was asked about it, I believe, December 28th, when our season was basically over, right? December, when we had terrible numbers. We were on like a 73 or a 76 point pace at that time. And, you looked at a bunch of the defensive pairings he kept rolling out ad nauseum, and they were just terrible analytically. And Lance Lysowski, the Buffalo News, asked him how he balances the eye test versus the numbers, specifically regarding Dahlin and Samuelsson, who had previous success, but now we're just looking terrible. I mean, previous success, it wasn't too successful, but we're just absolutely in the trash bin numbers. Don Granato responded, analytics are tough because there are so many analytics. There are so many variables that you can question some of the integrity in some of the analytics.
That's not a good answer.
That's just a complete dismissal. It basically sounded, there's a lot going into them. There's a lot of analytics. I don't really want to spend the time to understand them because they're confusing to me, right? And I understand not basing your whole philosophy off of analytics, but I mean, I would have hoped at that point in the season, especially for a team that's never produced really well analytically, right? We mentioned last season was the best season at 14th in expected goals for. Woo! That was our highest. But I would have expected something a little bit better. And sort of the same question was posed to Lindy. And for those of you that think he's an old style coach and he's going to kick analytics to the curb, I'm about to play a quote for you guys right now. And I think it's going to be surprising to a lot of people.
I love analytics. We are a huge analytics club in New Jersey. There's a fine line. Sometimes there's an eye test that goes along with analytics and won't get into too deep, but I think when you look at some of the better teams and you look at where there are, even if you're just using expected goals and expected goals against, whether you want to use entries or denied entries or, for how you're playing and how are you creating opportunities or how are you giving up opportunities. Part of that analytics is really good for maybe saying this player here, when you look at analytics, should not be playing with this other player. The numbers are there that support, you guys have terrible results when these two players are together or when these two players and somebody else is on the ice. It's a tool.
So, I mean, that quote is basically everything that I've ever wanted to hear a coach say about analytics. He mentions, look at some of the best teams in the game, how they're doing just simply on expected goals and expected goals against, right? That's the surface level for Lindy. But then he's talking about entries and denied entries. And then he's using analytics as a tool for pairings. And maybe these two guys don't play well together or they don't play well when this guy's on the ice, right? And he's talking about how it's a tool and how all these things can go in to help him making a more informed decision. And he's not questioning the integrity of the analytics. He's accepting them for what they are and where the game is. And oh, by the way, he's also saying they're just a tool and he's got to marry it with the eye test. I mean, hello, if you had to craft a response in a lab for what a modern NHL head coach should say about the analytics and how they should impact hockey and decisions, I think, oh my God. I was so excited. I did the Leonardo DiCaprio meme where I'm pointing at the screen when I was watching the press conference. Yep, that one. I mean, man, I was so excited when I heard that because it's just nice to know that, he's going to have a bit of a mind in analytics. And hello, we just built out the entire analytics department in the front office to help with scouting and player development. And it's worked great. We've rebuilt the number one prospect pipeline in the NHL via analytics, right? And why would we have a coach that, questions the integrity of those? It just didn't make sense. And it was so good to hear that. So my deep dive into expected goals and whatnot, I don't have access to zone entries and denied entries. That's a bit above my pay grade. I mean, I could, but, I'm just a podcaster and a YouTuber, so.
No, please. I want to hear more about our expected freezes. You've mentioned it once. I'm now expecting a daily segment about some obscure stat. No. Devin Levi had approximately 6.3 expected freezes, and he froze it 6 times. That means he's letting play go on too long.
I don't know
No,
how that matters at all. I just saw it. I thought it was interesting. I've not done any research into expected freezes that one time, but yeah.
No. But jokes aside, I'm sure it's very validating to hear, a coach kind of share your perspective, because that's always been your perspective, right? Is that analytics are an important tool, especially in the modern day game. They're not the be all end all, but like you mentioned that like when a defensive pairing is playing good or bad, you can tell via the analytics, right? If two guys are going out there and getting shelled constantly, it'll show in the analytics. And if you choose to ignore it like Renato did and just keep rolling them out, it's going to have negative consequences for the team. So what I take from that, right, is that, and I think what I take from his entire coaching career and kind of his mentality is that Lindy Ruff is going to learn. So even if there's struggles early on, Lindy Ruff will make adjustments, Lindy Ruff will learn, and Lindy Ruff will get better with time, which I think, again, is all in the Sabres' favor, right? You have a young team that's also getting better with players like, again, Benson, JJ Paterka, Savoy, etc., Power. All these guys are going to get better with time. So as Lindy's learning more and more about these players and how they deploy and the analytics and all that, I think that's only going to play to the Sabres' benefit, where he'll make the appropriate adjustments. If a defensive pairing isn't working, he won't be afraid to shake things up, just because they worked in the past. And then if it's been a while and he sees changes, then maybe he can go back to it. But he'll do it with both the eye test and analytics in mind. So I think, like you said, Rye, that's the perfect mentality for a modern day coach, where they utilize all the tools available to them while still trusting their gut and trusting their own eye for the game. Especially in Lindy's case, he's been around for so long, seeing how he's embraced the analytics and seeing all that experience behind the eye test. It's just, it's very, he has all the tools to succeed now.
Yeah, and it's gonna make our summer discussions a lot more interesting too, because we've got I've got this new reinvigorated excitement around the club, and it's tough for me to really see how this all goes wrong, right? I'm trying to still find. I look at all these numbers, and maybe it's just the fact that maybe he doesn't gel with these players, or these players are broken, or something. I don't know, but it's tough for me to look at his track record, what he's done, what rosters he succeeds with, and what the Sabres roster. It's tough for me to find negatives, and I can understand if Sabres fans, you are negative and apprehensive, and you're like, show me, I got to see it, right? You're talking how good he is at coaching offensive teams. Well, we just suck, so I'll believe it when I see it. So I think that's definitely something that I want to think about a little bit as we go through the summer. But right now, man, I'm not going to let myself get tied down on staying grounded, because I am very, very excited. I think next year's the year we do it. I really do. I think we break the drought. I think we make the playoffs. I don't know if we're going to make a divisional spot. The division's tough. I don't see Tampa Bay being, I see Tampa Bay being where they are. Maybe stuck with Toronto, or Boston starts to age out. I don't know. Boston's never going to die. I swear to God, that team is going to be 100 points for eternity. But, it might be next year. And it's tough. In the Atlantic, it's not going to be easy. In the East, it's not going to be easy. The Metro, maybe a little bit easier, but with the Atlantic, man, it's tough to really say, oh, we're going to be better than Florida or Boston or Toronto during the regular season. It's hard to say, but we'll certainly have those discussions as we go through it here. But man, I'm pumped for Lindy, man. I'm so excited. And I'm pumped for the Vancouver Canucks. We'll talk about your guys' playoff run here, but figure we should deep dive into the coach real quick. It's not a quick episode at all. It's about as long as our normal ones. But exactly, we just had so much to talk about here with the Sabres, but we're probably done with Sabres talk for a little while, so we can focus on the Canucks talk in the playoffs and Thatcher Demko's lower body injury?
No, don't remind me, Brenda. Don't remind me.
That's okay. The spirit of Demko is still between the pipes there in Vancouver. Casey DeSmith played well, but I wouldn't necessarily blame him for the game. It's 1-1 in the series for Sabres fans that haven't stayed up late. I did. I'm tired. Abby, you look very tired too. But any last thoughts here on Lindy Ruff in the coaching here, and maybe a series prediction now for the Nashville series, now that we're into it?
Yeah, as far as Lindy goes, I'm excited, right? Like, as I've met you, I've gotten a little bit more of an interest in the Sabres. Before you, it was just a cool team in the East. Came into the league at the same time, expansion bros, if you will. But beyond that, it was no real interest. And now, as I've kind of seen your roller coaster and your suffering over the last 5-6 years that I've known you, I am now invested, especially now as a member of the podcast. Kind of how you've jumped on the Vancouver train this year. I'll be happy to jump on the Sabres train next year all over again, and with you, and perhaps not as vulnerably because I'm just not as invested in the Sabres as you are. Obviously, you living in Buffalo and being a Sabres fan your whole life. But I'm ready to jump on this train too. I'm ready to see what the Sabres can do. And you know what? I'm going to double down. I will bet right now that they will make the wild card 2 next year.
Ooh, just squeaking in there. I'll take anything at this point. But it'll be fun to see the Sabres squeak into wild card 2, playing the Canucks in the Stanley Cup Finals as the Canucks defend their title. It'll be a fun series for sure for the podcast. But last thoughts, Vancouver. We'll talk about your guys' series here this weekend. But thoughts right now after 1-1.
Yeah, we'll see. I think we'll see how DeSmith plays Game 3 because we have a Seelovs available as well, and Seelovs was very good during the season. Obviously, he's a young goalie, and you don't really want to thrust a young goalie in there in the playoffs. But then again, the last time we did that, he had a freaking 985 save percentage or something like that. Then again, that was Demko, right? That was in the Vegas series in the bubble. So I'd be curious to see if they're willing to go to Seelovs. Personally, I would go to Seelovs just because I don't mind DeSmith, but he tends to have his moments here and there. So I'd like to go with someone a little younger. And I think with Seelovs and net too, the Canucks tend to play a little better just because I think they're more defensively cognizant and it's a young guy, right? They want to try and protect him. I think that ends up coming out well in their play as well. So regardless, I think I had my pick for this series was Canucks in 6, and I think I'm going to be sticking with it. Game 3 will be very key. The saying is you're not in trouble until you've lost at home, and the Canucks have lost at home, so they really need to take that series back and take back the advantage, taking either Game 3 or 4, preferably Game 3 of course, but taking one of those two will be their key to kind of keeping themselves in this series, and then potentially staying alive long enough to either bring Demko back or ideally winning the series and having other series go 7 so Demko has a little extra time to heal.
Yeah, I have the Canucks in 5, so we're right on schedule for me. If you guys just win the next 3, that'd be really, really cool. But
it's lovely. I want to be wrong.
Well, it's kind of going exactly how we previewed it, right? We talked about how the Canucks are the better team. They're gonna be probably the more dominant team in every game they play. But Philip Forsberg, 2 points last night. UC Saros, 2.38 goals saved above expected. Like, those are the things you got to look out for. Roman Josi had a pretty solid game, all things considered. But so I think on the whole, the dam will crack, right? I don't know how much Saros can keep up with this. And especially if you guys get quality goaltending. I think with Demko in there, I was confident because I'm like, I know Demko can go toe-to-toe with Saros. I'm feeling less confident now. I'm still believing in my Canucks in 5 pick just because this is one of those games. I saw the first goal that Nashville scored. I'm like, okay, here we go. Right?
Yeah.
It just kind of, this happens every once in a while. But I think, a little bit of time to reset, get on the road, continue to play your game. Don't worry about the fact that the puck didn't go in very much against Saros here in Vancouver. Head to Nashville, go shell them there, and just come back home with a chance to move on to round 2. I think you guys are in an okay spot. I like the way you've played. You've generated chances. You've controlled the chances against. Just got to get those timely saves and get the puck to go in, right?
Get the bounces.
Yep, just got to get the bounces, reset the mojo down there in Nashville. But I'm excited for it. Should be a fun weekend of hockey. Should be a fun series nonetheless. Things are looking good right now. Lots of favorites up early, but that can clearly change. But that's all the time we have for this one, guys. Make sure to share this with your friends, family, anybody you think would enjoy it. Leave us a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel here on YouTube at RyeBreadSN here. We love it, guys. Appreciate you being here for the entire thing. Lindy Ruff is back in Buffalo. Vancouver's in a fun series with Nashville, and we look forward to talking to you guys in the next one.
Peace.